Shrink the Nation is a podcast for thoughtful, informed adults, preferably with a pour in hand. The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the hosts and guests only and do not reflect the views of any employers, institutions, licensing boards, government agencies, bourbon distilleries, or family members, especially our family members. They've asked us to be very clear about that. This show is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said here should be taken as medical, psychiatric, legal, or professional advice. If you're in crisis, call a professional. If you're mad at something we said, we suggest journaling or emailing us with civility. We're here to challenge ideas, not diagnose strangers. We're clinicians, not your clinicians, and we have the bourbon to prove it. Let's go. All right, today's episode is a little bit of a mood board for the American psyche. We've got a president throwing a tantrum over a Nobel Prize he didn't win, administration flirting with martial law like it's a midline crisis purchase, and a group of young politicos whose private group chat reads like Freud's notes on the id, but drunk. This isn't a policy episode. This is about the psychology underneath all that noise, the validation hunger, the control panic, and the shadow work we refuse to do as a country. Every headline this week is basically a therapy session that got hijacked by a narcissist, a drill sergeant, and a frat boy. Support something strong, get comfortable. We're not lecturing tonight. We're diagnosing the national defense mechanisms. Welcome to Shrink the Nation. I'm David, 20 plus in the military, board certified psychiatrist, enjoying something round and strong. Gonna try to make this one quick. I know Robbie's got a lot going on today, so we're gonna just try to get through these headlines.
Hey, it's Rob, 25 years psychiatry, 30 in the military, and today I'm coming to you live from the Phoenix airport. So probably a little background noise and definitely some strange looks at the people keep walking past me, wondering why I'm talking out loud.
Talking to yourself is a strange word. Just shout things every once in a while. He'll be used to it.
Given the headlines, I have no doubt I will.
Excellent. So first topic, force pour, politics of validation. So President Trump melting down over the Nobel snub. Here's a little background on this one. After the Nobel Committee awarded the 2025 Peace Prize to the Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, President Trump lashed out publicly, calling the decision rigged and accusing the committee of putting politics over peace. White House surrogates and allies echoed his outrage, framing his admission as proof that global institutions conspired to deny him recognition for his, quote, historic peacemaking. Robbie, psychologically, what are we looking at on this one?
Psychologically, I'm looking at confusion because I don't know what peace was made. There's efforts, maybe, but to this point, I've not seen any actual outcome that has led to peace, not in the Ukraine, not even in Israel. I mean, as of today, Israel started bombing positions in Gaza again. My overwhelming psychological response is just pure confusion as to what peace was achieved that earned the Nobel. But ultimately, what we as a nation are seeing is that there are just some individuals that no matter how much praise is heaped upon them, enough is never enough.
Yeah, I think this really goes towards a lot of narcissistic injury. There's the words rigged, the politics over peace. Those quotes really kind of points towards that. It's the public rejection, right? It really hits at that fragile ego. Nothing hits harder than defeat, the lack of validation for those efforts. Now, I agree with you. There hasn't been any peace achieved, so it's kind of difficult to understand exactly what it is that we're hoping to achieve with a prize, but quite a bit of injury by not being acknowledged for the efforts that were made. And in all fairness, he has made efforts to gain some kind of peace. It just hasn't been made yet.
Yeah. I agree. Been involved in the Ukrainian process, has been involved in the Israel-Gaza process, and I certainly would be the first to compliment and be pleased with any peace efforts that come to fruition. But the odd thing in this scenario is that my understanding is that the Peace Prize is actually voted on in January. It just so happens that it's issued at this time of year. So January of this year, nothing had been done. So I don't understand the outrage, but I certainly saw it. And the other piece of this is I found interesting the allies or the folks that surround the president, how vocal they got in propping up that ego when the award did not go to Trump, how performative his allies felt they needed to be in order to heap praise upon a man who ostensibly has accomplished a lot. So the question that ends up popping into my mind is why? Why does he need continued validation and praise, he's done okay for himself.
Yeah, almost an addiction to it, right? Like it's there's that need for more and more. It's almost like that dopamine circuit that you get with substances. The more validation that you get for what you do, the more that you need. Even though there's obviously a lot of success, it's just not enough. The next headline needs to be bigger than the previous. You're president of the United States. So when is enough enough? And I guess the answer is never at this point.
Yeah. Well, those momentary surges of dopamine with praise feel very good. It does dissipate relatively quickly. So you then go searching for the next hit, which is never hits quite like you want it to, I guess. And then it drifts back away. So one does have to wonder about sort of under the defenses, under everything that we get to see, just what the underlying mental core of this person is and their concerns about themselves. And, again, ultimately, he's tried. And so I'll give him credit for that. And if does achieve peace in either one of those places, then I would say he absolutely deserves the Peace Prize. But it would be next year, not this year.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's some projection, seems like, and blame. We talk about that all the time on this show. It's that they're corrupt. It's kind of like that shorthand for like, I can't tolerate any kind of failure, that projection and blame that goes into it. Like you said, if it's voted on in January before you even had a chance to do anything, obviously it's not going to go your way. You didn't have a chance. You weren't really in the running. But then to accuse them of something that it wasn't even possible, it's kind of an interesting look inside the internal workings, isn't it?
It is. And, I keep thinking about Little League that, you see your kid loses the Little League game and you blame it on the umps. They made bad calls and that's the reason you lost. But it's, fundamentally anything that challenges one's self-confidence, you have the option of accepting that and saying, okay, maybe I didn't deserve it. Maybe I'm not as good as I think I am, or maybe I didn't do as good a job as I think I did. Or you blame corruption, you blame the other guy, you blame the umps. They made a bad call. That was clearly a ball, not a strike. And yes, it's easier to swallow for some. Certainly would argue it's not the healthiest approach to always blame corruption anytime you don't get what you want. And I wouldn't allow my child to do that. So that's where we're at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it certainly is a interesting place to be right now. All right. So let's go to our second pour. This one came up earlier this week and it's worth taking a look at. We're calling this Frat Politics Leaks Its Id. Young GOP chat exposes the shadows. Little background on this one. There were some leaked screenshots from a private chat among young Grand Old Party Club members in Washington that revealed racist memes, misogynistic jokes, and boasts about their insider status. The fallout has embarrassed senior party figures and reignited debate over whether such behavior is immature humor or a glimpse into the movement's emotional basement. So, what are your takes?
Yeah, this one just kills me. And it really ends up opening up lots of questions. So, for one, these are referenced as the young Republicans, but we're not talking like 14-year-olds here. We're talking folks, I think in order to be in this group, you have to be under age 40. So, these were individuals who have reasonably prestigious positions, state level leadership, national level leadership, and their support staff, not young people, not technically young people. I think these were all full-fledged adults. So the defense that I've been reading and seeing on the news that, hey, it's young people making mistakes doesn't really hold any water whatsoever. The question that we have to ask is this their true selves and the persona that they present to the rest of the world isn't? Or was this just this group of insiders who were, I'm going to use the term virtue signaling, but with one another, for absurdist purposes. We're making each other laugh with this talk that I think if said in the public specter would have clearly, they probably would not have done in truly public environment, but it is absolutely troubling.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the shadow. This certainly exposes that. I've been harsh on the id, but certainly the id surfaces when anonymity or group reinforcement lowers the superego. When there's that level of anonymity and encouragement and you're speaking through a screen, there is that level of maybe behaving in a way that you normally wouldn't. And it's not an excuse, but it certainly does happen. There's a good question there. Is this something that's like just below the surface? Is this unique to this group?
Yeah, so psychologically, Jung has this concept of the persona, and he would say that, and I think everyone, our tens of listeners who are listening into the background noise that has to be hard to tolerate, that's coming from my end. But he would say that there's this obvious quality that you and I, who we are with one another versus who we are with our grandmother, our significant others, with our children. There's a slight difference. With your boss, there is a difference. That the person that you present to the world is different in all those environments. Jung would say the problem comes in is when your personas start to be so widely dispersed that if who you are with your grandmother is so significantly different than who you are, say, with your significant other or with your friends, it becomes more challenging to hold it all together, that you're not an integrated personality. So it does make me wonder that both from a persona standpoint and from a group dynamic standpoint, that this is an in group. And in fact, this group that was talking, they're not just an in group, they're an in group. So the in group is the young Republicans. Inside of that group is something else. And clearly, from a group dynamic standpoint, their sense of humor had drifted toward something that I think an outsider would look at and kind of say, obviously, this is racist, sexist talk. They said things like they loved Hitler and joked about gas chambers and killing their opponents. Interestingly, both their opponents on the other side of the aisle, so Democrats, but also opponents within their little group, their in group, the young Republicans. They made jokes about rape, homosexual rape, actually raping one of their internal group enemies. So, from a group standpoint, their sense of humor clearly has drifted. It did make me think, though, that about the Army. Like when I'm in a deployed location or a combat location, my in group at that moment, our humor drifts, and it drifts significantly into some dark, dark places. Now, I'm not excusing these individuals at all, but I did suddenly think, gosh, if there were text based recordings of the kinds of things we used to laugh about in Iraq, I don't know how well received they'd be.
Yeah. As you were talking, what I was thinking about, and perhaps I'm not privy to everything that they were talking about. And so there is a line, but I do think that given a cross section of probably anybody's internal discussions, we would probably all sit back and go, wow, that probably shouldn't have been said. There is almost certainly a line that any group think gets to where we'd all go, okay, yeah, that definitely crossed the line. But I would imagine even on the other side of the aisle, what would be considered a private conversation between a group of individuals, you might assume would go in a direction potentially that would be embarrassing to read if it got out, which is probably why these types of conversations are probably highly sought after by the opposition. Not to excuse it, because it isn't okay. I'd say walking around any military unit, you certainly do overhear conversations where you think that's probably not okay. It's probably not okay to have said that or to have heard that. But yeah, it isn't okay. It's not okay. It definitely isn't. But I would imagine that most group chats and probably do especially out of context, but even in context, it's probably just not okay. I guess, especially talking about rape or loving Hitler or gas chambers, I would say definitely beyond the pale.
So my speculation, and I mean, I forget how many texts. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of messages that have been released to the internet. My guess is it likely started out as an absurdist humor that, I think if you and I jokingly said, I love Hitler, the context matters. The context counts. And if you and I were to say it, say on this show, I think the audience and you and I definitely would understand we are being absurd for humorous purposes. We do not love Hitler. So contextually, I don't know really the full story, but I do have the sense that it's probably absurdist humor. And imagine there is a transcript of a conversation you had when you were out in the middle of like the ocean on a destroyer. I don't think you'd probably be proud of the transcript, and you'd probably look at it and be like, "What was I thinking?" I do not
I
know.
cannot confirm or deny that there were not conversations that I would be willing to admit to at this point in my life that happened when I was 19 years old.
I definitely wouldn't. I mean, I can actually remember very clearly some of the humor that we adopted in Iraq, and it was dark and brutal. And it was a function of where we were and what we were doing and all that. But I definitely would not be proud of a transcript of it being released. But this is the other component of this is the world that we live in now and the ease of communication. There are records now of our communication. I mean, there's transcripts.
Yeah, I think there's probably a bit of one, read the room, and two, understand your role within society and what you're asking within that. I guess if you're in a group chat of fellow soldiers in the middle of a war zone, your conversations amongst fellow soldiers who may or may not die tomorrow might be viewed differently by the public from those of the people who are asking to be viewed as potential leaders of the country that are in a group chat with people solely in that position. That's the only reason they're in a group chat, is because they're being viewed as candidates for leadership positions to head the country. So yeah, I think there's probably a piece of that plays into it.
Fundamentally, what we're asking here, and then talking about alternatives, but I think the fear is this a window into their truest selves? That are these truly the belief structure that they hold? That is frightening because you're absolutely right. This is a group who's angling to be the next generation of leadership of the GOP. And my sense is that most of us wouldn't vote for gas chambers and Hitler.
Well, and I'd also venture to guess, and I don't want to be apologetic for anybody, but much like anybody else, is that on a group chat of that nature, my suspicion is that somebody within that group chat, and I couldn't tell you who, but somebody, yes, holds those views. Somebody, and maybe several other people, probably don't hold those views, but don't feel comfortable calling that out as inappropriate for fear of being ostracized because nobody else was calling it out. That would probably make more sense as that more of the group think, the deindividualization, the digital mob that happens. The collective, nobody is saying anything, but probably not everybody says, oh, this is great or even right. But because nobody else is calling it out, everybody is sort of going along with it, maybe going, ha,
Yeah.
but everyone is probably uncomfortable, but not comfortable enough to say, hey, this isn't okay. Whereas maybe one or two people are actually leading the charge on the really disturbing stuff. Because that does kind of go with a lot of those conversations. Usually it's one person who's got the darkest.
Yeah, it reminds me of my granddad. He used to be fond of telling me that it is very challenging to soar with the eagles when you're hanging out with a bunch of turkeys. So the nature of group dynamics is that there is a lowest common denominator, and it's going to fall under a bell curve, and there's going to be people at both ends of that spectrum. So in this group, there was someone on the low end of the bell curve spectrum that apparently may hold these beliefs, and that ends up affecting the entire group. And you're right. What happened is a norm was established within the group, and people didn't speak up for fear of being ostracized from the group.
Yeah. And I don't know that it excuses the group. It doesn't, and probably says a lot. But, that's for the opinions of whoever wants to establish those opinions.
Yeah. And one last thought before we move on to the next one. I guess I was not surprised by something like this, that modern technology, transcript, basically conversations that were intended to be private. Didn't surprise me that people are saying things that I don't necessarily agree with or I find reprehensible. What I have found interesting is some of the defenses and who's actually coming to their defense. And it has altered in a shameless direction. And we have certainly beaten the concept of shamelessness to death on several episodes. But the defense of this has been, in some sectors, absolutely shameless.
Yeah, I think the throwing out the boys will be boys line, that probably will happen a lot with these. I don't want to come off as sounding as if I'm apologetic for it, because I'm not. I mean, the truth is I'm not. Having those conversations, whether they're in private, in public, whatever, I mean, they're obviously reprehensible, disgusting, awful conversations. Probably better that people find out that future leaders on any side hold these just awful, awful viewpoints, so that the public can be aware. Whether they were intended to be heard by anybody is irrelevant. I think we should hold all of our leaders to the high standard of common human decency. That's just the truth. The things that you brought up, those are just not appropriate things. Whether you're on the right or the left, that's not a right wing or left wing perspective to wish death, rape, or heinous, inhumane acts on another human being. That's not a political thing. That's just atrocities. That's just awful. We shouldn't condone that no matter what, nor should we defend it.
Hey, it's Rob from Shrink the Nation. As my friend David so eloquently states at the beginning of the show, we are clinicians, but we're not your clinician. We love to joke around and dive into the tough topics, but there's something really important we need to say. If you're struggling with your mental health or facing substance use issues, we want you to know you're not alone. We have dedicated our professional careers to mental health, and we care deeply about it. It's okay to ask for help. Reaching out to a professional in your area could be the first step toward feeling better. Don't wait. There's support out there, and it works. Please take that first step. We want you to be well. Now let's get back to the show. Oh, and don't tell David I said he was eloquent. He'll be insufferable.
So, all right, third and final pour. Here we go. The commander and the couch. President Trump weighs invoking the Insurrection Act. A little background here. Vice President J.D. Vance confirmed the administration is considering invoking the 1807 Insurrection Act, which would permit domestic troop deployment for law enforcement under claims of, quote, restoring order. The move, unprecedented in scope, blurs civilian and military boundaries and signals deepening authoritarian reflexes under the guise of, quote, national safety. So, thoughts?
Yeah, quite a lot, actually. Our founding fathers were very familiar with a government system that did not hesitate to use its military forces to control its people. In fact, that was the norm. So we are so far removed from it that maybe the average person does not appreciate that to our founding fathers, a standing army was a threat to freedom, not the protector of. And over the years, we've done a good job setting a tone. Our advertisements for our military is that we are the defenders of freedom. But historically, it was an authoritarian government's army that maintained their control of the nation. So the army was much more frequently used against their own people than against the enemies of the nation. So there's a long history of distrust for the use of force within our borders. And the Posse Comitatus Act is basically a law saying that we are not allowed to use our military forces to uphold the laws of the nation. We have other bodies that uphold our laws. We have police forces. So, theoretically, at least, deploying federal troops internal to the United States is a violation of that and is historically something that is concerning. I think our founding fathers would be very concerned about this because they put a lot of effort into thinking through how they protect this budding democracy, this new experiment in government into the future.
So, from a psychological perspective, it reeks of, let's say, regression under stress. Our nation is stressed out, and we're reverting to this punitive parent mode instead of self-reflection. We're very much stressed out at this point. We have more polarization than any time in recent history, which we can argue for hours as to why. But rather than figure out how to resolve that, we're trying to make it worse. And it's like going back to our British roots. We're regressing to that non-democratic state. It's interesting. It really is.
It's
scary.
Scary. It's scary.
Yeah, scary.
Because theoretically, the Insurrection Act basically does give the president the authority to utilize troops to put down insurrections. So if there is an event in which someone is trying to overthrow the government, the president can deploy federalized troops. There is an out here. The concern is that really what we're talking about is if the Insurrection Act is utilized, then the implication is that it's going to be utilized against the enemies of the United States. And in this particular moment, the enemies of the United States are being defined as fellow citizens who are demonstrating within the bounds, for the most part, the bounds of the law, something they have a right to demonstrate. They have a right to disagree. They have a right for peaceful demonstration. But now they're being labeled as enemies of the state. And that's the fear I have. And this is from a family system standpoint, this is scapegoating. You know, in a family that's struggling, very often one of the children will say, who is behaviorally disrupted, can be blamed for the overall family problem. And they become that the child becomes the symptom bearer for the sick family. And right now, these demonstrators are sort of being scapegoated. The implication is they're the enemies of the United States, that they are trying through their demonstrations, they're trying to overthrow the government, and that it's okay to utilize federal troops. And in truth, their right to demonstrate should be protected. That both sides should be protected as citizens of the United States. And I guess the implication here is that this is mostly geared toward immigration, ICE, that these folks are threatening immigration forces. Is that the right word? Shouldn't be, but they're threatening,
Yeah.
and that the use of the Insurrection Act is in order to protect them and to conduct their government-sanctioned activities.
Yeah. No, and it's very, very interesting. More projection, collective projection, the enemy within myth externalizes that unowned fear and shame. There's psychological perspectives we can use to look at it. Control as a defense, invoking force to regulate the internal chaos. But at the end of the day, it's interesting to watch, and in some ways it's kind of surprising.
The demonstrators, I think, actually have been really smart. And I took a course on nonviolent protest when I was in college. It was during my fourth year, and I had to take a synthesis course. And it was basically focused on Martin Luther King and Gandhi and the power of nonviolence. There's a temptation when you're feeling oppressed to want to fight. And historically, fighting back has not been terribly effective in most circumstances. So the fact that these folks are seemingly maintaining a nonviolent stance and are actually protesting through the ridiculous. They're wearing gecko suits, blow up furries, and their signs are usually funny. It's hard to look at that and think insurrection. It's hard to see someone in a blow up, I don't know, teddy bear outfit and think, yeah, we definitely need the 82nd Airborne called in on this one.
Well, in watching the first few protests, there was definitely that feeling of nobody wanted to really engage violently. Whoever pulls the trigger first, or whoever engages in real violence, is going to be labeled the tyrant.
Yeah.
And that's going to control the narrative. What did Kierkegaard say? The tyrant dies and his rule is over. The martyr dies and his rule begins.
Absolutely.
That right there, you said it. The demonstrators, they're not looking to engage. They're just looking to draw attention to what they think is injustice. That's pretty much it.
The pretext. I mean, right now the focus is Portland and Chicago, and then recently Washington, D.C. Now, D.C. is kind of a special case, since it does end up being set aside. It's not owned by any one state. It exists in a different legal status, and I'm not at all surprised that troops were initially deployed to D.C. because of that legal status it has. Now it's Chicago, it's Portland. It is, I don't think, unsurprising that these are cities that are sort of considered classically left-leaning or Democratic-run cities. And what we're seeing is a tale of two cities kind of thing, where one side is projecting this sort of peaceful demonstrations, the silliness of how these folks are, and they're intentionally being silly, how they're protesting. And the other side is making reference to these cities as war-torn, as hellholes, and as if they're failed states. And I think President Trump said something to the effect, he expressed surprise that there were even stores left in Portland. And when it turns out, Portland's a very normal city, and it has a normal city life. And they have suburbs and all that.
I mean,
it is
I
Portland.
don't know if you've ever been to Portland, but
Portlandia. Yeah.
It's not a normal city, but it is a city.
It is a city.
It is a unique city. It is a strange city, but yeah. But but it
It
does.
functions normally, and we shouldn't underestimate the number of folks who maybe are very conservative or GOP leaning who do reside in Portland. Everyone has to have a home. So it is as maybe it's a little closer to a bluish purple, but it is as purple as any place else in the United States. But this tale of two cities that we're seeing portrayed in the media is really interesting. If you go to conservative leaning media sources, they are projecting these cities as, as basically war torn. I mean, it might as well be Gaza. And if you go to left leaning sources, they're portraying these normal cities that are just normal, and these protesters is fully peaceful. But I would say the take home point here is that if you are protesting, peaceful protest, and leaning into the ridiculousness of what you're fighting against is the way to go if you want public support and if you want legitimate change.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that brings us to prescriptions. So I've got a silly one. If you are ever snubbed for a Nobel Peace Prize or just any award you don't get that you really wanted, just hand yourself an award. Make one up. Give yourself one, right? Stand in front of a mirror, announce for outstanding emotional resilience in the face of reality, and then just clap like you're your own studio audience. And then just repeat that daily until your dopamine stabilizes or the neighbors call someone.
Yeah. So I've got a one as well. I think we should all have our own applause sign that hovers over our head, just like a studio audience. So anytime you're feeling a little unsettled, you're questioning yourself even slightly, you hit that button, the applause sign comes on, and you get a good old fashioned sitcom laugh track and applause, depending on what you're looking for. And the other would all feel better.
There you go.
The other one that I'm going to encourage our tens of listeners is you got to figure out at what point boys won't be boys. So the boys will be boys thing works, I suppose, but there has to be a line that where you draw it. So when do we say that? That's not just a boys will be boys scenario, because right now it seems we're ever more leaning into that as the excuse for bad behavior, and it certainly should be noted that text string did not contain one single female voice.
So maybe not okay.
Maybe not okay. Boys will be boys, but that doesn't mean they don't need punched in the face on occasion too. That's another thing boys often require is some externally opposed disciplines. Sure, boys can be jerks, but that doesn't mean they don't need spanked.
True. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up this episode. Thank you to everybody who stuck around. Hopefully not all that background noise made it, but we'll see. Hey, we'll cross our fingers. Smash that subscribe, hit like, reach out, shrinkthenation.com, subscribe to our weekly newsletter, and I think that's it. So
yeah, I'm gonna go beg for a flight. I
Yeah.
do not want to spend another night in Phoenix. Lovely city.
Lovely city.
Need to go though.
Thanks everybody, and cue up that music and we're out.